Hello, this is the information video for Key Stage 3 English. I'm just going to talk you through a few things that your child can expect, our students can expect in their Key Stage 3 English lessons. So to start with, I just thought I'd run through the key skills that we teach that sort of underpin everything that we do in Key Stage 3 English, and then that they sort of move up into through Key Stage 4 and into Key Stage 5. So we have sort of three key threads that we cover, which is being creative, being critical, and being conceptual. So those are sort of the three underpinning elements that make up English. And then within each of those, we have reading, writing, and speaking. So you'll see that we talk about fostering creative readers, critical readers, and then conceptual readers. And there is sort of a progression from the left to right there, but it's not a linear progression, and sort of different lessons will pick up on different of those elements. So in a particular lesson, it might say, today we are being critical writers, and that will key students into what specific skill that we're learning about in that particular lesson. So that's the sort of the underpinning of it, the overall skills. And then in terms of what we actually study in order to deliver those skills and deliver that knowledge, each year group has 5 units that they study across the year. In year 7, we start off with a unit looking at myths and legends, which looks somewhat at sort of the ancient Greek myths and legends, but then also branches out and looks at various different legends and myths from across different cultures, and uses that as a vehicle to teach creative writing mostly, but also to think sort of conceptually about why myths and legends exist. And then we move into studying films, a selection of films or extracts from films by the Japanese film Studio Ghibli, where we're teaching sort of analysis of concepts, but looking at visuals rather than thinking about language. And then from that we move into a novel, which at the moment we read a novel called Lampy, which is about mermaids and set in, I believe it's Cornwall, and that is moving on from Studio Ghibli, sort of the analysis of the visual elements, into studying how do we analyse language and how does that work. And then we move into a unit called the Time Traveller Unit, which is looking at the history of language and the development, particularly of English, but then also how it links in and how it differs maybe from other languages. And then we finish off by reading a Shakespeare play called Much Ado About Nothing, which is fantastic, often said to be the first romantic comedy. It's sort of the blueprint that a lot of modern romantic comedies follow is sort of laid out in Much Ado About Nothing. And that's about sort of teaching students how to understand a play in performance and in its context and everything like that. And moving on to year 8, we start off looking at the Gothic. We read some examples, some famous examples of particularly Victorian Gothic writers, but then also some more modern Gothic writers. And we look at how can we write in that Gothic style, how can we adapt that style of writing. From that, we move into talking about Space Invaders, which is a unit that sort of takes the idea that for whatever reason, planet Earth is no longer a viable option for us as humanity to live on, and it puts the students in charge of leading the solution to that and making speeches, in particular speeches to the UN, and then speeches to people who are going to be joining this new civilization that is going off and finding a new planet to develop. So that's about oracy, it's about speaking, it's about writing persuasively, it's sort of non-fiction based. And from that, it moved on quite nicely into a unit called Radical Thinkers, which is looking at protest writing in a variety of different forms. So it's a kind of a non-fiction unit, but looks at all sorts of different sources, and thinks about how to write persuasively and how writers express their perspectives. Then we have a novel called Revolver, which is set in the American West, in sort of the Wild West era. Again, that's teaching about sort of the study of language and the study of the novel form. And then finally, we end year 8 with looking at a unit that is about Shakespeare's context, sort of the world that he existed in, and then how that affected his work and his writing. And finally, in year 9, we start off with a couple of creative writing units, starting off looking at forms of writing that are more modern. So we particularly focus on video game writing. So how do people write for video games, and how is the industry affecting how people write? And then we also look a little bit at film writing as part of that as well. And then we move into looking at dystopian fiction, which is similar to the Gothic unit in that we read lots of examples of dystopian fiction, and then we sort of apply what we learn from those into our own pieces of writing. Then in the middle of the year, we look at, we study Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, and particularly study that through a lens of the gender presentation in the play, because it's very interesting how that world is presented. Shakespeare creates a very sort of masculine world, and then puts quite a what can be seen as quite a feminine character of Romeo into that masculine world, and it sort of sees how that affects him. And then we stay with the idea of drama, moving into Unit 4, where we look at the modern play The Crucible. Not that modern anymore, written in the 60s, but a fantastic piece of playwriting. And we look at how, similar to what we looked at in dystopian fiction, how do writers sort of get across a political idea in their piece of writing. So The Crucible was about the McCarthy trials in America at the time. So that's a way of exploring that. And then Unit 5 for year 9, at the end of the year, we look at what's called parallel voices, which is about breaking out of the constraints of the sort of traditional English literary canon that we're normally expected to follow, which we don't particularly anyway, but it breaks us out of that, and we see sort of when certain things were happening in Western culture, what was, or European culture, or English, British culture, what was happening in other cultures, and how are there parallels alongside that, and how have different people reacted to different developments across the world. So that's the overview of the 3 years. It's a really interesting, really diverse, quite challenging curriculum. It is also subject to change every year. We evaluate it and consider it, so there might be slight tweaks to this. If, for example, your child is in year 7, by the time they get to year 9, things might have changed slightly, but the ambition and those underlying key skills will always remain the same. So finally, and this is what people tend to watch these videos for, is how can you actually be helping at home? How can you be supporting us with our English teaching, with what happens at home? And I always say the most important thing in Key Stage 3 is to keep children reading. I'm always hearing from parents that students used to read a lot when they were in primary school, they used to love it, but for whatever reason now they don't. They're very unlikely to pick up a book when they've got options of what to do. And all I would say is, please, can you, as parents and guardians, attempt to encourage, engage, and entice children at home into reading by providing books or providing ways of getting books, talking to them about what they've read or are reading, talking to them about what you're reading and what you have read, maybe recommending books that you enjoyed when you were their age. That sort of thing is absolutely priceless in encouraging reading. I would also say, flag up here, that the school library is absolutely chock-a-block with books, great books. It's an incredible resource, obviously free for students to borrow. So please do encourage encourage children to go along to there and take out some books and explore what they can read. And if you're particularly worried about a student's lack of reading or lack of engagement with it, then you can always talk to your child's English teacher and ask them to make what's called a reading referral, which means that our librarian will book a meeting with that student, get to know them a little bit, talk to them about what they're interested in, and then set them up with a few book recommendations that she thinks they will find interesting. It's a really good way of trying to sort of get that hook. And I've just put a few tips for reluctant readers as well in there in terms of what people can be doing. Newspapers and magazines are a really, really good source. You can find articles related to topics that students are interested in. Similarly with non-fiction books. So if they're interested in reading about particular things in newspapers or magazines, those shorter form articles, then you can sort of move them into non-fiction books, which is going to be a bit of a longer read. I would really, really encourage time away from screens. I think I totally understand the situation teenagers are in at the moment with phones or whatever, but if you can try and encourage some time away from a screen so that they can pick up a book and be reading something even for 5 minutes before bed, it's just incredibly powerful for all sorts of reasons, not just the benefits of reading, but benefits to sleep health and all of that sort of stuff. And finally, just another way of possibly hooking students into reading. There's all sorts of novelizations all over the place of films, TV shows, video games that students or children might be interested in. So look out for those and see if that helps. So I know that is the real thing at the moment in the video game industry is these novelizations of the games. So if that's something that your child at home is interested in, maybe worth getting or looking out for a couple of books along those lines. That is all the information I have to share with you. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions or anything, please don't hesitate to get in touch via the website. Thank you very much.